This is Gary Swanson and Loring Leifer interviewing Mel Mallin at his home in Overland Park, Kansas, about his knowledge and understanding of the garment industry in Kansas City. Mel, did you grow up here in Kansas City?
Grew up in Kansas City, born and raised. Went away to war in 1942, came back in 1946, went to New York to find my fortune. Found my wife instead, and she's cost me a fortune ever since.
Well, it sounds like a normal picture. Sounds good to me. Were you in the garment business in New York?
In New York, I went to work for a small chain of ladies' ready-to-wear stores, and then shortly thereafter went to work for a very distant cousin who was a dress manufacturer at 462 7th Avenue in New York. Was there until December of 1950, when they went out of business after being in business for many years. And then we came back to Kansas City, where I had always planned to bring my wife and child. In New York, I bought everything that went on the dress except the fabric. I bought the shoulder pads, the belts, the buttons, the everything but the fabric.
For the manufacturer for whom you worked.
Right.
So you had a very good understanding of the garment business from a manufacturing point of view, and I'm sure from the sales and production side as well.
No.
Okay.
I only knew about buying with the stuff I bought, and I was coordinating. We had as many as 50 contractors working for us. Quite a large business.
At that time you were in New York.
Right.
What was there a budding garment industry operation in Kansas City?
What was Kansas City? I knew
Kansas
nothing
City?
about. I had no connection with the garment industry in Kansas City. In fact, I came up with the idea that I would come to Kansas City and represent the people I was buying from in New York. And I packed up two great big suitcases, like in Death of a Salesman. Came to Kansas City only to find that there were about 12 people doing the same thing, hardly making a living.
In Kansas City. So was it your intent when you came back from New York? Yeah, I know the garment business. Was it your intent to get into the garment business?
Yes, I was hoping to base my future on what I had learned in New York and represent these folks that I've been buying the buttons and belts and all those things from. Only to find that they didn't need me at all, and so I started looking for a job. And I had two interviews. One, this is in the middle of December. One was with
What year was that? 50?
1950, December
Okay.
1950. One, I went in to see. I'm forgetting the names already.
Silverman?
Yeah.
Central Bag Company?
No, not Central Bag. This was a brother or a cousin, Mendel Silverman, who manufactured dresses. And I walked in, and he was smoking a great big cigar. And his shirt was wide open.
The picture of prosperity, was it?
Yeah, and the great big high. And talking to people, they said, "Don't go to work for him because he's got a revolving door. He'll give you a lot of money, but you won't last 2 weeks."
Because he's difficult to work for?
Yep. The only other opening was with Morris Garfinkel at Maurice Coat Company, and everyone said, "Don't go to work for him because you'll never get any money." Well, I chose the lesser of the two evils and went to work for Morris Garfinkel, was there for 9 years.
And where were you located at that time?
At 8th and Washington.
And what was Maury manufacturing?
Ladies' coats and suits. And I started as a shipping clerk, and the Lord shined his countenance down upon me, and 3 months after I arrived, the general manager of the plant, who was the owner's brother-in-law, quit, and I crept in and became manager after only 3 months there.
At Morris Coats and Suits?
At Morris Coat. Stayed there until 1960.
How did you convince him that the shipping clerk, could be the general manager?
Well, I didn't. I just took over the duties that he had been performing, and I was never crowned manager. But every year I got a nice raise and didn't have to ask for it. And so whoever was talking about Morris Garfinkel as not paying anybody anything was wrong.
So you were there from 50 to 60.
Right.
And now what niche were you in ladies' coats and suits in terms of price?
All right, we made primarily in the coat field $29.75 less 8%. The whole garment industry had this crazy discount idea. The price was a certain price less 8%. At least that was the fact in the dress industry. I don't know how it was, in the coat industry. I don't know how it was with dresses and sportswear and other types of ready-to-wear. So that would sell for about $50.
So were these coats for the masses, or was it one step up? Where were in the?
No, it was for the masses, for the masses. On the first floor was Fashion Built Garment Company, who appealed to higher prices and appealed to, and they had the original owner of Fashion Built was actually a designer, and they were one of the top flight brands in Kansas City.
As a general manager, you had responsibility for all the functions: design, manufacturing,
I
sales.
was fortunate in having the chance to touch every phase of the industry. I worked with the union. Every Wednesday afternoon there was a union bitching session, so I learned how to handle you don't learn how to handle how to work with the unions. I was involved with every phase of the business, which 10 years later gave me the courage to go out on my own.
So the union, now you were a union shop,
Yes.
is that right? How many employees did you have at the
We had
height of the 1950 to
70, I
60?
can remember that we had as many as 70 employees.
You had one plant, Kansas City?
One plant, yeah.
What, to the best of your recollection, was the largest dollar volume of sales you had in a given year?
I have no idea. I don't remember.
Under 10 million probably back then.
I have no idea.
No idea, so I won't
remember-
speculate
I don't
either.
remember those figures. You're going to find this a lot as you interview people that has been so long ago that it's hard to remember.
Yes,
distinct
and
figures.
you had salesmen on the road?
We had salesmen on the road, and if a salesman was sick, I had to go out and take his place.
How many salesmen did you have? Do you remember
I
roughly?
remember around 6.
6? And how many seasons did you have?
We had the fall and spring season, just 2 seasons a year.
So you had two design.
Yeah, it was my job.
Period of time.
The fun part of my job was the same thing I was buying in New York, I was buying in Kansas City. And fun part, we would put out a catalog of each season, and it was my job to give each garment a name and each fabric color a name, and that was a fun part. And we made mostly sizes 8 to 18. Petite, regular, I don't remember the sizes. What are the size range, what do they call them?
Petite,
Petite,
medium.
and then from Missy sizes, we made Mrs. sizes.
And
But an interesting thing that would happen at the end of every season, we would find ourselves in style number 656 with quite a few size 18, quite a few size 14. At the end of the season, some of those 14s would become 16s, and some of those 18s would become 16s.
how'd you get rid of overruns?
That's how we got.
That's how you got rid of
You
it.
just changed
So
the
you-
label, the size.
so you
of
sent the-
label.
So
sent
a lady
flyer
walked
out
into
and
a
said-
store,
Yeah.
and she's used to wearing a size 18, and all of a sudden this 16 fit very nicely, so it made her feel real good.
You were slick back even in those days.
I don't know
Mel.
if that was common in the industry, it probably was,
But, okay, but you got rid of all the last season's merchandise in that fashion?
well, no, there was always something left.
So
and,
you carried it over?
or we carried it over, or we just gave it away.
Typically, how many styles in a given a season of the 2 seasons would you have? 15,
You're
20?
asking for numbers. No, there's about 30.
About 30?
25 to
And then
30.
broken down size and color between,
Well, they were all in sizes and colors, but different designs.
yes, about 30 different designs.
Right.
And then you had different sizes and
Style
colors.
numbers. Let's call them style numbers. Different style numbers.
Do you remember any of the names of the garments that you came up with, or the
No, I
colors?
didn't. No.
You had cranberry instead of
I
red.
don't
and-
remember any of the colors. I don't remember any of the names. I just remember that I always found that to be a fun part of my job.
Were you, was the Maurice Coat, was it successful? Was it a moneymaker?
Yeah, it was successful during the years that I was there. Unfortunately, I left in 1960, and it wasn't long after that Morris Garfinkel died. And his son Arnold Garfinkel, who
Developed Quality Hill?
he didn't develop Quality Hill. who came on the scene.
That's what I read in the paper. Go ahead.
Nah, he came on the scene every summer. The boss would tell me, now Arnold is going to be out of school now. I want you to give him a job that'll last him all summer. He would come and he would work for about a week, and then he'd disappear the rest of the summer, but he was a fabulous golfer. So, but after his father died, he was on his way to Japan. He was a Nippophile. He loved the Japanese culture. And he got word that his father died. He came back and ran the business for, I think it was about 4 years after his father died.
4 years and then just left it, or was the business sold?
It was already at the point where most of the industry had gone down, and he just liquidated the business.
And that would have been in the mid-50s, early to mid-50s.
That would be 60.
One of the
64.
least enjoyable parts of the job was Wednesday afternoon working with the union. It was mostly about, everyone was on piecework. So it was usually gripes about piecework not being what it should be. But I had one complaint where this sewing machine operator at the union meeting says, I am very upset that the lady who's sitting to my right, the sewing machine operator sitting to my right, is pulling all my blood from my left side over to my right side. Now, how do you handle a complaint like that?
Put her on the other side.
Well,
Exactly.
tell her.
I said, would it be acceptable if we put the operator over on the other side? She says, yes, I'd be happy with that.
And that worked out okay.
It worked out.
See,
okay.
ever the peacemaker. That's wonderful. With the union, did you have a lot of difficulties with the union? None that you couldn't resolve.
You had no. They were the power. You really had. You try to work it out. And fortunately, we had a union representative who was reasonable, and we had a shop steward, a lady who was big and mean looking and tough, but she was fair and knew what she was doing, and worked out all right. But later on, when I was in my own business, I had 2 occasions to fight with the union. At one point, the International Teamsters came to me. I was a box manufacturer, and I had 43 employees, and they told me a letter arrived saying, we have signed up your shop, we're ready to start negotiations. Anyway, we ended up having an election, and we beat the union 38-5.
That was in your company.
Yeah. Later on, I had a box plant in Denver. Same thing happened there. We voted out the union in Denver.
Mel, at Maurice, you had about 70 employees.
Right.
Most of them probably doing production, almost all of them.
All of them.
Where did you get those employees? What was their background? Were they?
It was a broad cross section of humanity. They were all shapes, sizes, colors, nationalities. Primarily in our instance, I remember them as being mostly Italian ladies. Very few black. The pressers, the people who were doing the pressing of the garments, primarily were black. We had little old ladies that you couldn't tell how old they were, but they were on piecework doing handwork, and they were all a good workers. They'd come to work every day. We had very little trouble with absences.
So you were pleased with the workforce.
Oh yeah, very pleased. And
Why
I think in general, the whole garment industry was pleased with
why did you leave the industry? Why did you leave in 1960 after?
I left because
10 years.
Arnold Garfinkel, the son of the owner, was lurking on the sidelines, and I tried to get Morris Garfinkel, the boss, to make my job more than just a job, to have some small piece of the business, and I could see that it wasn't going to happen. So, being a good Jewish boy, I went into my own business.
And the business in the next 4 or 5 years went out of business.
The business, it lasted for a while. I'd say about another 7, 8 years. But then the whole industry was going down.
Okay, now.
The reason it went down.
Yeah, why did it go? Why did the?
Okay.
Can we go back? When was the heyday of the industry?
I came in 1950. It was already, the heyday was going on. It must have started right after the war, and during the war, there was a lot of garment manufacturing done for the Army. And there were uniforms, there were caps, there were all kinds of garment manufacturing done for the Army. And but then the 50s and the 60s was a heyday, in my opinion.
So it's still going strong when you left in 60.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yes.
Still going strong when you left in
And it didn't
60.
go down because I left.
And you already had something,
I went into box business.
and you already had something lined up.
Yes.
Or you looked for something, found something, and pursued a different avenue.
Right.
Is there any, what was the reason why a MEL in Kansas City, as every city in the country, New York and other places, that most of the people in the garment business were Jewish? Why, what was the attraction of the garment business to a Jewish person?
I've been looking to the answer for the answer to that question for years and years and years. It was an industry that they could get into. Some people say, well, either they were tailors or their parents were tailors in the old country, and that's what got them into that type of industry. But that wasn't the case. In my case, the owner of my business was a prize fighter. He had nothing to do with his nickname was Kid White, Jewish guy, but he was a prize fighter.
This was in New York.
Here in Kansas City, in Kansas City. Some of the people had Brand and Purett. Simon Brand came from a family of tailors. Present, the father was a tailor, and some of the others were tailors.
In the old country?
Maybe not in the old country, but as first generation American tailors. But a lot of them started, the trend started in the old country where they might have had something to do with sewing trades. But it was just seemed to be an industry where Jews could become important.
Was there much of a barrier to entry because of capital requirements? There might have been a low barrier to entry too. They didn't have to have a lot of money
They didn't
just
have
to
to
buy
have
a
a
few
lot of money
sewing
to get
machines
started,
and
right.
get a loft.
Right, exactly. And it ended up with, well, in Kansas City, the Jewish owners were by far the majority, but some of the big ones were not. Nellie Don for sure was not, and they were among the biggest dress manufacturers and others.
From your recollection, Mel, in 1960, that was when the time you left the industry, you knew every garment manufacturer in Kansas City, probably, know who they were.
Pretty much.
And
yeah.
who were...
We'd see them in the restaurant.
Who are the ones, yes, at that time? I know Brandon Purett's, you had Rose Wynn Coats. Who were the people behind Rose Wynn?
All right, in the ladies' coat industry, you had, right, Brandon Purett's, Rose Wynn, Stern Slegman Prince, Fashion Belt, Youthcraft, Lewis Walters, and Rice Coat Company, and that's about it. Maurice Coat Company, where I worked, and that was about it. In dresses, I'm not sure, because I wasn't that involved with the dress industry. There was lounge wear, there were robes, there was hats, there was men's suits and uniforms. Kansas City Custom Garment was primarily involved with.
Who was the family at Kansas City Custom Garment? Do you
That
remember?
was the Stowaway family. Saul Stowaway, often pronounced Stoloff, Stowaway, and Lou Lesky was the manager of the plant, who's still around. Mrs. Stowaway is in her 90s and still going strong, and she's a doll. Saul made uniforms for all kinds of police department and all kinds of services, and he made Harry Truman's suits and a lot of other important people's custom-made suits.
On the national scene, what was it viewed as Kansas City's being a big contribution?
Kansas City, as far
Coats and
as
suits?
coats, we always said that every seventh coat worn by a woman in America was made in Kansas City. Next to Chicago and New York, we were the biggest. I'm pretty sure of that.
And biggest just in coats
biggest
or in garments?
in garment manufacturing. And then I think Dallas was next. Dallas soon, St. Louis was in there someplace.
But the Midwest, after New York, the Midwest was the hotbed of garment manufacturing, pretty much.
Except for New York.
Yeah, except for New York.
Then things started happening. Sometimes the unions are blamed for the beginning of the downfall. That they just couldn't compete with foreign manufacturers, and that's what killed the whole industry, as it has so many other industries. If our piece rates were halfway decent, then you could get the same thing done in another country for a whole lot less.
When was it obvious to you, Mel, that the garment industry in the United States of America, and let's say specifically Kansas City, was on the decline?
I don't know exact day when I bought Manhattan Sponging Works. The purpose of that business that Manhattan Sponging Works did was processing fabrics for manufacturing, for the garment manufacturing. They would shrink woolens, they would inspect woolens, apply finishes like Scotchgard, and laminate fabrics. When I went into the business, there were 300 similar companies. When I went out of the business, there were 30.
How many in Kansas City besides you and Manhattan?
Just us.
You were the only one in
Yeah.
Kansas City.
So all our customers were the garment manufacturers, and
And I'm sorry, when did you buy the Manhattan Sponging
I don't
Works?
remember.
And when did
And I
you
don't
sell?
remember when I went out.
Okay.
How long, in your opinion, was it you had it? 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4?
No, about 7 or 8.
7 or 8 years? And you hadn't gotten the box business yet?
No.
The sponging business was your business?
The sponging came
100%.
way later.
Uh-huh,
You had the box business first, and then you got into the sponging.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah.
The sponging business looked like a good opportunity, so if you left Maurice in 60, it must have been, as you said, the 50s and the 60s were the heyday.
Yeah.
And you actually got in on the tail end of the heyday, didn't
It was
you?
probably around 67, 68 that I went into, that I bought Manhattan Sponging Works.
And then how soon after that, in your viewing it, did the demise begin? Reasonably imminent? I mean, did you buy it at the height of
You could
the...
sense it. You could sense it that the smaller outfits were dropping out. At one point, I think there was something like 80 manufacturers or well, you also got to consider that Kansas City was a large jobbing center before it became a manufacturing center. In other words, distribution of garments made elsewhere. Poindexter was the biggest, located at 8th, from 8th to 9th,
Broadway.
from Broadway to May Street. They were the biggest, and there were several others.
Now, in the price point on the coats and suits in Kansas City, who were the entry-level price guys, and then kind of the medium and then the high on the coats and suits?
I think there were just 2 levels. There was
Okay.
us, most of them, Youth Craft and Fashion Built were the two higher priced coat manufacturers. They prided themselves on being able to achieve higher prices, and they took greater pains to come out with more original styles.
Designs. Who would
Let's
be
talk
the...
about designers for just a minute.
Go for it.
Designers, for the most part, consider themselves designers, but they were not actually designers for the most part. In our case, we had a designer whose main job was to take a garment that the boss would bring in that he would buy from Jones or some other department store that was made by a big manufacturer in New York, and take the sleeve or a cuff or a collar off of that garment and put it on something that we already had patterns for. The designers, for the most part, were exotic pattern makers. But there were a few. At Fashion Built, Louis Present, who was the original owner of, I think it was Louis, because there was 2 Presents, 2 brothers, and then Henry came on the scene. He was actually, he would come up with creative new designs. And there were just a couple others who were that creative and whose responsibility was to actually come up with new things. Otherwise, one copied from the other.
On the inside, that'd say you knew everybody. Everybody in town knew everybody.
Pretty much.
Was there a lot of pride in being the guy who got the new hot item out, or the new style, the advanced styling that was hot at the time? Or did you sense that kind of competition?
Didn't sense that kind of competition.
Uh-huh.
They were all pretty friendly. There was very little robbing a designer or somebody important from a competitor, taking somebody, stealing another employee.
Mel, you mentioned two price points in coats and suits, primarily the
Yeah.
low end and then the higher end.
Yeah.
Who would be the customers for the higher end at that time and the customers for the lower end?
Well, just like the Jones was the lower end and Wolf Brothers was the higher end, or Hartsfeld's was the higher end.
So the Adlers, the Harsfelds, the specialty shops at Petticoat Lane in Kansas City, as an example. And,
No, the coats made in Kansas City went all over the country.
Yes, yes.
And
But those
a lot
kinds of
in Kansas
shops
City, yeah,
in
a lot
those other
stayed in
cities.
Kansas City.
What about Kansas City caused the garment district to flourish here? Why did it happen here and not Omaha or
Well,
St. Louis?
we were a central distribution point, the heart of America, where from here you could go out in all directions for shipping purposes. There was a supply of labor. There were buildings. An interesting thing that we talk about all these factories. Youthcraft building is now offices. Maurice Coat Company building is now Barclay Evergreen. Where Lewis Walters building is loft apartments. Kansas City Boys Wear, loft apartments. Rice Coat Company, loft apartments. Every one of the buildings in the River Market area, not River Market area,
Yeah.
in the garment district, has either offices or lofts or retail.
Was Manhattan sponging in the garment
The same
district?
building, in the same building as Fashion Built and Maurice Coat, and there was also a dress manufacturer on the top floor.
You could smell that Folgers coffee every day, couldn't you?
You had a choice of smelling Folgers coffee or the stockyards.
And sometimes maybe you didn't have a choice, but there were two distinct
Right.
smells. I've read, Mel, that the attitude, the opinion that the garment industry in Kansas City and the rest of the country did not have its demise because of foreign competition as much as losing its market, losing its customers. In other words, bigger accounts began buying directly from a manufacturer. We didn't need a salesman anymore. We didn't need all the choices.
We were manufacturers. The style trends would change.
Okay.
If
But every little town that had a clothing store and they had ladies' coats and suits and ladies' dresses, it disappeared when you saw Costco and Target and Walmart.
it was heading in that direction.
So-
That's a big part of the whole question.
So would you say it's a
Correct.
kind of a combination of the foreign competition along with the
point.
changing in marketing and
Good point.
buying in the United States?
Yeah, the customers disappeared. Therefore, the manufacturers
Well,
disappeared.
how come Kansas City couldn't supply a Walmart? Or why didn't you get the accounts for a Walmart or a Kmart or some of the huge
Well,
retailers?
the coat industry also suffered from the fact that they were pretty much stylish coats, and all of a sudden, sportswear was the big thing, where people weren't getting dressed up anymore, and that had an effect on sales. One fun part was the way the length of the coats would juggle every once in a while, and that's still going on, the length of women's dresses and coats.
When they're short, the stock market goes up, Mel. Remember
Something
that.
like that. Anyway,
Now, you were a general manager.
How did you decide what the length of coats would be next
You were
season?
New York?
what everybody else is doing, right, what New York is doing.
Yes. And a lot of your designing, and so it was just like you said, you find out what New York was doing and add your collar or your cuff or your unique button to it, and all of a sudden you had a style.
That's right, something new.
Something new, which is what
Yeah.
the customer wanted.
One thing about the garment industry that was not good, and that was the fact that there wasn't such a thing as a pension program, there was very little sharing of the profits, profit-sharing plans were non-existent. Most of the folks who spent their lifetime in the garment industry and left went away with nothing. But maybe that wasn't just the garment industry, but things are industry in general.
I think though, well, probably the old man, the man who began the company, felt like he had invested himself, his limited capital. He had all the risk, and I won't call him selfish, but he probably felt like he deserved most of the spoils. At that time, we didn't have 401k programs or programs that, even if had been disposed to do it, could have offered an employee.
That's right.
How did this compare to other industries at the time? If you
Have no idea.
okay.
I have no idea. But it's sort of, after I was out of the industry for a long time, when I went into my own industry, I was sensitive to that. And when I, shortly after I became, looks like I was going to have an ongoing business, I started a profit-sharing plan.
Who were the, besides your own company, or of which you were general manager, who are the companies in town, based on what you knew, that you admired?
I admired all of them because they'd been in business primarily for a long time, and everybody sort of liked each other. It was a nice atmosphere, and there wasn't you couldn't call up your neighbor and say, look, I've got a hand sewer who is absent today. Can you send me over a hand sewer? That we didn't get that friendly. But everybody was pretty close.
Did you have lunch together?
A lot
And you go to the same
lunches
places?
together. Yeah,
Talman's or?
Talman's was one, and Weiss's was in the Coates house, in the lower level of the Coates house, and Sidney's was on the corner of 9th and Broadway for many years. And everybody seemed to go. I don't think anybody brought their lunch.
That's a good
Everybody
chance.
went to one of these places, and it was sort of a social thing.
Who did you have lunch with regularly?
People at my level, with other people who were pretty much doing the same thing I was doing, from maybe my suppliers, who were all buddies, and some of them are still around. Meyer Singer's still around, and he's about the only one left of. Oh, the Hammer brothers were a lot of fun, and there were all kinds of industries that went along that supplied the garment industry. There were shoulder pad manufacturers. There were Hammer brothers made belts, in addition to some things like thread and fabric and things like that. But there was a furrier who made fur collars.
What company was that? Do you remember?
What?
The furrier. Who was the furrier?
Don't remember. One guy
And
who got most of the business.
and there were a number of small specialty companies, weren't there?
Yeah.
Like Danny Dare,
One time
Kids Wear.
Danny Dare was Kids Wear, and Danny Dare's owner, Harry Shopmaker, is still around, one of the few. And Stevie Toggs.
Stevie Toggs, yes.
What's his name?
Sam Greenstein.
Greenstein. What's his first name?
Sam.
Sam
Sam Greenstein.
Sam
Uh-huh.
Greenstein is still
Stevie
around.
Toggs.
Stevie Toggs was a major children's garment manufacturer. And, gosh, I don't know.
Do you remember the names of dress manufacturers besides Nellie Don?
Lee's Dresses, Gurnus Garment,
Gurnus Garment.
Sherman's business started out making dresses, house dresses. No.
Hey, in your opinion, how did the garment industry in Kansas City, third largest garment industry in the United States in its heyday, how did that contribute to the economy and the well-being and the growth of Kansas City in your, that's kind of a
I wish I had
macro
the-
question,
I
but
wish I had the figures of the total employment in the industry. Someplace those figures got to be around. Someplace in the city directories, you can go through the city directories going back to the 60s, 50s, and go through the whole directory, and you'll find out the names of the companies and how many there were. I know there were at least 80 at one point. We counted them.
80 different companies.
80 different companies that are involved with garment manufacturing.
That had to have a sizable influence. I mean, if,
Oh, yeah.
if everybody were the same size as you are, 80 times 70 employees is 5,600. So it's probably 4 or 5 times that many because of Nellie Don and some of the larger
Right, some of the larger manufacturers.
manufacturers.
What kind of professional associations were there?
They formed the Kansas City Garment Association. Hyman Brand was for of blessed memory, was forever the president of the garment manufacturers, and that was the only one. And then the International Ladies Garment Workers was the union, and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America was for the menswear.
Was there a lot of menswear other than Kansas City Custom Garment?
No, there were
Maybe-
caps.
And of course, you had Lee with overalls and coveralls.
Oh yeah, we forget
Big
about
company.
them. Yeah, we had Lee, we had Burlington. They made overalls too. They made right at the corner of 9th and Washington. There were all kinds of. There were millinery. Millinery. You know what millinery is?
You know, I say hats and decorations,
Ladies' hats. There's
boas and that sort of thing.
There's a story about the tailor in New York takes his son out in the country for the very first time, and they find some flowers, and the son says to the father, what kind of flowers are these? And the father says, son, I'm a tailor, I'm not a milliner.
Now, you worked very, very hard. You had to be successful in that business, but what was the fun? What was the fun for you in being in the garment business in the 1950s and 60s in Kansas
The fun
City?
was I was making a living. I worked hard. Hours were not important. I was fortunate that I had a boss who was allergic to going out into the factory. He wouldn't set foot in the factory because that's where all the trouble was. Unfortunately, I picked up on that, and when I became a box manufacturer, I had the same problem where I had great difficulty going into the factory because that's where the problems were. But I went to work every day with some other guys in the same industry, and together we came up with $75 and bought an old Studebaker, and we rode back and forth to work in the same car, same carpool. And the lunches were fun, and made a lot of friends, and it was a good life.
Well, was the business fun for you? Just the whole process of...
The business was tough. It was
yes.
It was not an easy way to make a living for the owners. But somehow or other, they made it for the most part. Didn't hear of too many people going into business and then going out, failing and going out.
Was there a lot of that in the garment industry?
No, there was not.
A guy'd get in and he just plug and plug and plug.
Exactly. Yeah.
And ultimately find his niche and be successful at whatever that might be.
Right.
How many hours would you work a week?
I think we came to work every day at 7 and went home at 6.
What about,
And
did
five
you
and a half
work on
days, 5 and a
Shabbos?
half.
You always worked Saturday morning, didn't you?
I would always work Saturday morning.
You
Yeah.
worked on Shabbos, huh?
Shh, don't tell anybody.
They worked long.
The other day I was getting a package ready for mailing, and I said to the mailman, I put one stamp on, and I was in the post office, and I said, will this take another 3-cent stamp? And it popped into my head. At one point, first-class mail was 3 cents, air mail was 5 cents.
They just put it on a penny postcard, Mel.
And one day, my boss caught me putting a 5-cent airmail stamp on a letter that could have very easily gone on a 3-cent stamp, and he gave me hell.
Was there, do you think, very, very tight cost control? Or did
We
it
tried, yeah, oh yeah.
Or did it depend on the manufacturer? But did every guy who was the head of his company
I felt
understand that he had to?
I felt sorry for the fabric salesman, because they really, really worked on the fabric salesman to hold down the cost of, which was the main cost. Yeah, I get a big kick out of seeing a young girl, or maybe too old a girl, wearing a really short skirt or short shorts, and I asked myself, I wonder how many of those you could get out of a yard of fabric.
You never forget, do you?
And they're getting $19 or $20 or something for that little piece of material.
Okay. Now, when you sold, admittedly, you probably weren't doing very extensive cost accounting, but
No, I was not involved with that. Right?
yeah. But what did, including the burden, the overhead, what did a $29.95 a coat that sold for $29.95 less 8? That'd be about $27. What did that cost? What did that cost you?
Gary, I can't remember that.
Uh huh. But
Besides, it's classified information.
if you told me, you'd have to shoot me.
That's right.
Well, we don't want that to happen. But you operated. Well, you had an idea of what you wanted your margins to be.
All I know is I got paid every week. Week, every month.
Do you remember
I don't
what you
even
were
remember.
making as a shipping clerk? Or
I left. I
left?
came to work at $65 dollars a week, and when I left, I was making $12,000 a year.
That was very good, wasn't it, in the 1960s?
Yeah, and I went into a business that had one employee, and the year I bought it, the total sales were $23,000. And my father said, "You're stark raving mad. Well, how can you leave a real good paying job like this and go into, you got a wife?" And I don't know how many kids we had at the time, 1960, we already had 2 kids. 2 kids? Yeah, 2 kids.
What was the name of your box business?
All
Mel?
packaging company.
All packaging. Do you still have it?
Still, no, we sold both plants, the Kansas City plant and the Denver plant, in 1980, and they're still going strong in Kansas City and in Denver.
And you grew it from one employee to how big
We
a
had
business was it
43
when you
in
sold
Kansas
it?
City and 50 in Denver.
Significantly multi-million-dollar business.
Yeah.
And what do you do today to make a living?
Today, after I sold the box plant in Kansas City, the buyer stayed in the building for 2 years and then left to put the operation in another building which they owned. And the building sat empty, and in 1983, I turned what had been the box plant into the first loft apartments in Kansas City.
In the River Key, the old River
At
Key
the
area?
Garment District.
The Garment District.
Yeah.
That is in the Garment District? What's the address of
Yeah.
that, Mel? Where's that?
312 West 7th Street.
Down the street from Folgers?
Just right across the street, diagonally across the street from Folgers, right across the street from Bird and Fletcher, the printing plant.
So you converted that into lofts. You were the first loft converter in Kansas City, isn't that right?
Exactly.
And you're,
What would have happened if you would have rented out that building? How would the face of Kansas City have been different if you would have found a tenant
Somebody
for
else
that
would have come
building?
along, because it was going on all over the country in all the major cities where warehouses were being converted into apartments, starting really in New York in the 1960s in an area called Soho, south of, pronounced New York, Houston Street.
in that sense, I'm digressing a little bit, but were we in Kansas City a little late to the party on the conversion to lofts?
Normally,
or were we?
we're normally late to almost every party that
Yes.
is being held somewhere. But,
Yes.
but eventually it arrives in Kansas City, including styles. During the garment industry heydays, Kansas City would be far down the road on styles. It would be popular in New York and Chicago, and then gradually it would become popular in Kansas City.
So really wasn't too difficult to style, was it, to design, because you just found out what had been selling
Exactly.
in New York and knowing that you were going to sell it
Exactly.
out here.
Once in a while, someone would come up with an idea, like Vic Jean, like Sherman Dryce's slick shirts, which he must have sold 1 gazillion of them all over the country.
He sold several million of them. I don't remember how many,
Yeah.
but
He gave us the number of how many he sold.
It was 3 million or
biggest
10
year.
million,
3
some
million in the
humongous
biggest
number.
year.
Yeah.
once in a while.
And that was everybody's dream. You find something
Mm-hmm.
that not everybody else is making, that you can make a reasonable profit on and just
Mm-hmm.
make a whole bunch of them.
Did you do, when you were at Maurice, did you ever do any custom manufacturing for anybody else?
No,
Mm-hmm.
it was always for the public.
Now, what happened to the Manhattan Sponging Works?
Manhattan Sponging Works started out with 300 similar companies, and what we were doing, gradually the mills themselves started doing, and did away with the need for a middleman for the work that we did. You could buy fabrics that already had the Scotch Guard on it, that you could buy laminated fabrics that were already laminated.
And so did you close down the business? Did you
Just
sell it?
liquidated, just gave everything away.
Mel, when you look back on the history of the garment industry in Kansas City and your participation in it, what thoughts do you have about the ascension and then the ultimate demise of the industry for factors outside the control of the manufacturer, pretty much?
In its heyday, it was great. It employed an awful lot of people, and it was really good for Kansas City. It made Kansas City an important center in the country. There were a lot of buildings that were used. An interesting point I might bring up is that at one point, Harvey Freed and I and a couple other guys came up with the idea, since the garment industry was gone, to come up with a group called Historic Garment District Group. So we got a few of the folks who were active in the industry, and we hired the consulting firm Laventhal Horwath to do a study of what they thought about the idea of having housing. Gradually, we were getting more and more empty buildings in the area. What could be done with the buildings? Could it be housing? Could it be office? The report came back, a thick report saying that housing wasn't going to work and office wasn't going to work. Well, as I stated earlier, every building in the garment district is filled up with either offices, retail, or loft apartments.
One more question about just that, Mel, and that is, were all the buildings typically owned by the company that was in them? I mean, it was desirable for Brandon Tourist to own their building, for Maurice to own their building, for Rosewind to own their building. Any thought about that?
Most of them were not owned by the owners of the businesses. Fashion Built, Maurice Coat Company, a sportswear company, and Manhattan Sponge Work, and a dress company were all tenants in the building. Brandon Puritan had their own building. Lewis Walter had their own building. Youthcraft had their own building.
So it's just a question of use of capital, probably, whether they could afford it.
Slegman Prince had their own building. Rosewind had their own building.
Do you have any other thoughts about the garment industry you'd like to, in Kansas City, you'd like to tell us about?
I know that for 1 year, and I don't remember what year it was, every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, I would appear at 8th and Broadway and would work with the park department and the contractor to make the Garment District Park happen between Broadway and Washington on 8th Street.
And that worked out.
And it took a year to make it all happen, but now it is a fabulous little park, and we have a sculpture there commemorating the history of the Garment District, which we're very proud of.
Well, excuse me. That's great. What is your cause celeb today in your life? What is it you made that happen? What are you trying to make happen now?
I like to make good things happen. That's why I was put down here on earth. I started the River Market Business Association, and was president of that for a while. I started the Villa Residents Association here at Village Shalom. I'm president of that. And tonight there will be a meeting where we will, for the first time ever, our residents will have a chance to know what they're doing when they go into the voting booth on November 2nd.
Mhm. That's very good.
I just like to stay busy doing good things.
That's good. Could you take one more minute now and tell us, to the best of your knowledge, who are the people exist in the garment industry, who were in the garment industry during its heyday that you know, who are still around?
Okay,
How about if I email you the list that we have to keep from repeating names we already have? I can email you the list, and if you notice people who are absent, will you
Fine.
add them to the
Okay.
list?
yeah.
All right, let's do it that way.
I'll try to remember everybody that had anything to do. It's not easy.
No, it isn't. Well, you've had your mind on other things, and it has been a day or two.
What would you like to see in the book? What do we need to focus on in the book?
Just to let the world know that we were there, that at one time Kansas City was important, not for stockyards, not for railroads, not for baseball, not for football, but that we were a manufacturing center. That we employed a lot of people and turned out a lot of nice clothing.
Well, those are great words.
What contribution did Kansas City make to the overall garment industry? Did we change the way things were manufactured? Any
No.
great innovations here?
No, we followed the leaders,
So,
Now, somebody
and we're still doing it.
said that Kansas City was one of the first to job out, to have companies that specialized in like only cutting the patterns.
Nah.
No, that wasn't true, okay.
so
Maybe in that particular
As in every-
field that was.
yeah, as in everything else, that industry, just as in banking and other industries, follow what has happened on the East Coast and the West Coast, and it
Exactly.
eventually gets here.
Exactly.
And we're more copiers than innovators. There
Yeah.
are exceptions to that, but
Yeah, and we don't boom and we don't burst.
yes. Well, thank you very much, Mel, for your thoughts about
It's
the
been a
garment
great
industry.
honor, and I hope something comes of this.